Good morning, welcome. I'm Lauren Cross. I'm the manager of outreach and public programs for public art at the University of Houston System, and I'm pleased to be introducing this collaboration today. This is the third of four different conversations with artist and composer Amos Cochran, whose work Color Field Outside In is on view at the University of Houston main campus through May 31st, 2021. And I'm sure, and this is also a collaboration with the University of Houston's Brain Center at the Cullen College of Engineering and the College of Technology. And I'm sure you are ready to dive right into the conversation. So without further ado.
Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I'm very happy that we are meeting again. We had many questions, many interactions in the last two time we met, and just as a recap, we're thinking about how best to understand the relationship between a grammar of sound, right, and a grammar of brain activity, right. And so Amos was explaining to us, his process, how and his ideas behind developing this grammar of sounds, right? That I like to call it, and I hope that we can learn more about that today, and also try to see how we can use a brain-computer interface to link brain activity to action. In this case, sound, right? So Amos, I don't know if you have one comment.
No, I mean, Lauren, and I really appreciate you having me and to come chat again, and Pepe as well, and everybody. I think I've seen most of you. I'm glad that you came back to chat. I think the last two sessions sort of did a good job of an overview of sort of what I've done, and then the general idea for this. And I think where I am, I mean, other than just answering any sort of questions that you guys have, I'm curious today and on Thursday to talk about, strategies and ways, different ideas to actually implement the idea, because I think, we have the basic idea, I think, has been put out there a few times, as far as we take this grammar of sound I've created, the grammar being individual audio pieces, and how can we program those to where a BCI can trigger them meaning play them. So how do we actually, if that's the idea, what's the technicality to bring that to life? So that's sort of what I'm curious to hear today. And I mean, I can ask questions, you guys can ask questions, we can just chat. I mean, whatever you think is going to help move that forward, Pepe, is where I'd like to head with it.
Right. So I think that's a good starting point, because actually the most important, right?
Right.
And by the way, anyone here, feel free to chip in, just unmute yourself and
absolutely.
Your hand off. But I think there are certainly different ways that we could address this, right? So one would be to take the view of having, a self-organizing autonomous system, right? That picks up the sounds and then through the amazing, neural computing power of the brain can then generate, different sequence of sounds, right? To create something that is more than the elements, right? So, and by that I mean, what if we were to play this grammar of sounds to everyone here? Everybody wearing a headset, right? And then we measure the response of each of our brains to that grammar, right? And this could be initially the individual components of the grammar, but also some of the some sequences that you may want to explore, right? To understand what we call in systems engineering, what is the a way of identifying the system, right? How our system, our individual brain respond to the stimulus, right? So that would be, an initial way of trying to understand the extent to which each of the elements of your grammar of sound affect our brain and our behavior, right? So that would be a very simple experiment in a way. Simple in the sense that is, input output, right?
Right, and so that's an interesting. So we'd almost be, it's almost like a I guess it's step one, but it's almost like a pre-step one, to where, we would just play the audio as a piece, and have people wearing the BCIs, and we record and we measure and we see what parts of the brain are they are firing and they're happening. And then that
Exactly.
gives us interesting. Okay. And then that gives us that then gives us a space to sort of create within, because we know these regions are being activated. Okay, that's
So that gives us a model, right? A basic model
that creates
of
a model,
how we respond, right? Which then you as an artist could use to sort of emphasize some aspects or others, right?
Well, what I think could be, what's interesting about that is actually, because I've kind of gone through this conversation about different ways to test things on my end. Maybe I've gone about that the wrong way, and actually what I need to be doing is creating, let's say, some different grammars, a 2 to 3 minute audio piece for each grammar, and let people listen to those, and we record each version of like grammar 1, grammar 2, grammar 3, and maybe which one of those is the most interesting, which one of those gives us the most the biggest blueprint to work with, then build a smaller grammar that can be, that's okay, I see what you mean. That sounds great.
That could be certainly very interesting. And a way to sort of rank in a way, right?
It's ranking, but it's also, I feel like I've had the hardest time testing it. So in a way, that would be a very real test that we would get real information from that we could then use. And I like that idea a lot, and I have not. I've sort of jumped over that step actually, because this is where my lack of knowledge and where you guys all come into play. You guys on the screen here, I'm sure, know a whole lot more about the way we can make this happen, more so than I do, because I hit a point where I understand the idea, I can put the grammar together, but the steps that move it forward, that's where I don't know, and I love that idea.
So let's talk a little bit more about this idea then, because it's something that we could really do. So what we would expect to get, what kind of information we could get out of this, right? And let's call it, for a name, it's as I say, it's an input output. It's a sort of open loop kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you stimulate your brain and you see what happens, right?
Right.
And what happens means different things, right? We could look at which brain areas are activated, so it could be not only auditory cortex, which I would expect to be active, but it could be visual areas, could be areas related to decision making, it could be areas related to memory, to emotional stimulation, what have you, right? So this is some information that it could bring, it could bring some memory, it could bring some experiences back to you, right? It's like triggering, right? It's like when you hear a sound that has some meaningful effect on you, right? By that I mean, it transports you back to some time and space, right?
I like the idea of it. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. All right, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, no, just the idea of seeing where, like you said, these different regions of the brain, and which ones are being affected the most by it, and that would give us. And so let me feel like I understand this. So let's say we gather that data, okay?
Yeah.
Then we can know on the next phase of it, as far as assigning these different regions to the grammar that will be played back in real time. That's what we're sort of learning, is which regions of these brains we can assign it to. Is that correct?
Yeah,
that's great. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now there's another question on top of that, right? So
Alex, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please.
I'm not. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I moved back to the lab. Anyway, if the idea is that potentially the memories are linked to certain sounds, when all of this information be subject specific, so we wouldn't be able to use the collective correlations that we find across the entire population. We'd have to collect data for each individual person.
No, I don't think it's. I think we just have some people to test, and people wouldn't have to have a full map of their brain done to then experience it. We're just sort of using this as, I think, as a test, is my understanding.
Yeah, right. And
But what do you think, Alex? I mean, talk to me about what brought that question up?
Well, Pepe was saying that some of these sounds could be linked to specific memories, which I guess could imply that different regions of the brains activate for different people. But if we instead focus more on the population specific, activated regions, then we could potentially just have like a generalized Grammarly thing.
And I think it is. I mean, I think the map that we would, if all of us on this could do that, we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 of those. And then what is a general consensus from that 7 that we could then use? Which of those regions are firing the most? Those can then become the map that we use to tie to the triggers. That's what I feel like makes sense. But again, I'm happy for everybody to chime in and talk about this.
And I was also thinking, I don't know how many different sounds you plan to record here, but and maybe this could be your link, because this is your expertise. Maybe you collect sounds that you find to be most similar, and then we create classes like that. And then I guess I worry about it if there's too many different types of sounds, then we're gonna have too much. We're not gonna get enough data from just these 7 people. I don't know.
Well, and this is another huge learning curve for me, as far as which regions of the brain can fire. How many? What is the answer to that going to be? If we all did that, are there 2 regions? Are there 7? I don't know. This is where I lose my. I don't know the brain regions well enough to know what even can fire. But actually, I do think once I sort of have some kind of a number, if we say, can I ask what seems like a silly question of how many regions of the brain are there that could fire? Is there an answer to that?
Well, there are many, right? But I think that's related also to the number of sensors that we can place.
Okay.
Right? And there's no doubt that we have very unique brains, right? So so there's some individuality in the way we behave and in the neural pattern, but there's also some common activation, right? After all, we move. This is just an example. We walk in similar manner, right? So you would expect to have patterns that are similar in the way they behave, right?
Right.
But on top of that pattern of functional movement, right, we also communicate through the way we walk. So we expect to have some component that relate to how expressive the movement is, right? So we expect to see some common patterns and some unique aspects, right? And when let's say for a minute, okay, we seem to recruit areas related to memory, and maybe across all these groups, but that doesn't mean we're thinking about the same memories, right? We just engage in those areas that we know are related to memory, and so we know that this stimulus might be triggering some of those, right? So now I think another question on top is, how these areas that we see that are activated, right, or that cease to be activated, because it's not only whether they are active, but maybe the stimulus also lead to suppression. Both, increase and decrease are important in the brain, right? So how these areas talk to each other, right? Because I believe that at the end, the specifics of the movement, or even creativity, we talk about creating something. It is specific to the way we put things together, right? And how the brain talks to each other. I think the differences among us is how our brain areas are talking to each other, right? And there where you see variability, right? So, and of course, this is another layer, right? And then we can go even deeper, right? And okay, so we know that prefrontal cortex, right, decision making is talking to auditory cortex, in the temporal lobe, right? And in this way, and that might be slightly different across all, right? But then what is important in that communication is this some specific frequency, right, that is writing, that is conveying the information, right? And so, there are different scales, right? We start with area, and then, how they are connected functionally, because they're also connected, physically, right? There are some areas that are connected directly one to the other, but there are others that go through different areas to get to that one, right? Some indirect connectivity, right? But and then what are the actual features that are being recruited? Now, Alex alluded to, hey, maybe this is a small group, And I think that's right. This will be a small experiment, right? But at the end of the day, when you train a BCI, you have to train the BCI on the individual brain. So by looking at group data, you get some general knowledge, right, about what's common, right, and maybe help to reduce the noise from in the signal. But at the end of the day, the reception is going to be very individual, right? So I'm not too afraid about having too few people participating, right? But the idea is that once we have a recipe, right? Once we have the approach, right? Then we can export that to as many people as we can recruit. In a performance, in a pre-COVID situation, right? We could have hundreds of people, thousands. It's feasible that we could instrument many of those people to understand the effect, right? And have the a better idea about this orchestra of neural activity, right? So I think these are great questions, but I think we are just starting to unpack the complexity of the system. I see Geraldina is joining us here. Hi, Geraldina.
Hello.
Hi. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. So I think Amos, I think that's a great start. If we can map the brain response to these different grammars, that will provide valuable information for both for all people here.
Right. Well, I think so. And I mean, and Alex, I like, I appreciate your concerns, Alex. And I like, how do we, let's say that let's say we tested, 10 people and we gather that data and that gives us a general response map that we can use. So let's say I'm just making this up, but let's say there are 5 areas of the brain that we can pull from. Then areas 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, those can be assigned different grammars. Well, I'm sorry, they could be assigned grammar. I'm sorry, like region 1 could be assigned the short sounds, region 2 could be assigned the medium sounds and the long sounds and the rests. And then each time that is read, so a sound is pulled from those banks to create what it is that we're listening to. Does that make sense, Alex? And it may not make sense.
Well, one of the things that we discussed in our last meeting with Akshay, with our small group, is looking at interpreting the data of the brain. And that's a whole other can of worms. So I think in general, from a point of view of one of us outside of the realm of the Pepe brain, one would say that's a logical thing to do. It's just proving really hard to figure out what are the salient parts of the brain or what are the pieces of information that we're looking for. And that I still haven't gotten that one.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the way the output of this will happen is beyond me right now. And all I can do is bring a general idea to the table and then say where the problem is with that idea. But Helena, one of the things we were chatting about was having a small group of people. If I were to create, which is say 3 different pieces of music that would represent 3 different grammars, we're able to then record the brain activity and those recordings make a general map, a general set of brain regions that we can then take and assign. This is what I was asking Alex. This is what we could then take those regions and assign. I could then break that, which grammar we like the best, which grammar gets the best response, break that into these individual short, long, medium sounds, rest sounds, and assign those to different parts.
So I'm sorry I interrupted. I wanted to hear Alex's answer.
But I really do want to know what Alex's thoughts.
Yeah, the short, medium, long stuff. I was actually potentially thinking that like different frequencies of the sound itself might be easier to identify rather than like the actual length of the tone itself. Because
well, no, let me ask. Okay, when you say when I say short, medium, long sounds, I'm thinking of the audio pieces that I'm sending you guys, like that I'm breaking them down into.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just, you know, if we have to predict on that, I mean, it has a length.
Oh no, but we
component.
don't. Maybe there's a disconnect here. I don't think there's a prediction going on. I'm strictly saying, let's say region 1 is read by the BCI. When it's read, it's going to play at random or in order one of these samples, one of these audio pieces from the short folder.
And okay, let me just, so I can clarify. These short things, that is a distance. I mean, like a length of time, correct?
Yes, but it's the audio. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, because, you know, if we're collecting all these things from different people, we'll have, you know, a half a second being played for one tone, and then we're comparing that with, you know, 4 seconds of play or something like that, and that might be hard to compare the two different segments itself. I was thinking, but potentially one thing would be like playing like a bass and a violin and a viola or something, and then you know, with the same length of time, and you just have different frequencies for each tone, and then perhaps it'd be easier to identify correlations to different segments. I mean, different sections of the brain activating.
I still don't. I might not. I must not be explaining what I'm not. Let me see if I can explain this in a slightly different way, because I'm not. I'm creating a pre-made set of sounds that the brain regions will be. Just the brain region being activated means blank plays from the grammar of sound that I've created.
Well,
so
I think there's something to keep in mind is that, you know, the brain's activating, you know, always. Individual regions might not activate independently of the others consistently.
Oh, that's fine. The point of this is that it can happen in any manner. It can, like, I can, like, remember when I was kind of showing you guys the keyboard map idea, Alex? So the idea is that it can happen in any way at any time, and everybody's going to be different. Our brains are not going to fire it the same way. There's no way. So therefore what I'm creating sonically is a palette that can happen in any way possible. They can happen in any order, and it's going to work. But if in a 1 minute time period, we measured 2 people's brains, we are not trying to line those up, and we're not trying to sync anything necessarily at all. The idea is that the audio plays completely at random, but it plays, if one person does it, it's going to play different than if the other person does it. I'm not trying to make a math equation to where something works properly, because it's going to work. It's a matter of.
Is the idea
so let me just see if I can understand too. So you know, I think what Amos is proposing is a way to give a voice to these brain areas, right? And this is going to be different for each of us, but you're giving a voice, a language, right, to be heard, right? And it's a kind of mapping, right? I mean, the proposal is, okay, let's assign, say, visual area, you know, whenever it's active, it's going to play this. While, you know, the prefrontal cortex is going to play this, right? And of course, they could be playing simultaneously. The brain is going to be mixing these things.
Right.
And that's going to be different, right? But what is important is that that each of our brain is going to respond in some manner, right? And of course, it's going to be different, right? There might be some common responses, but there are going to be a lot of very unique, you know, responses, right? So this is how I understood that.
That's
and
how
based on, and based on those responses, then you can fine tune the grammar, right? You will see that some might not be as triggering as others.
Right. Well, I think it gives us by testing it out, like we're talking, it will give us a way to say we're going to then assign these brain regions these sounds, as opposed to just guessing. Because I mean, I would assume that we could do that, but we would sort of be guessing which brain regions. We may have picked the wrong ones. That's why I like the idea of these tests where I make a couple of different, 2-minute versions of it.
Right.
We are able to see, and then that way, then we can really find it's like, okay, these are all brain region 3 is firing in everybody. We need to be sure that that's in there, and so on and so forth. And then we can assign the the grammars, and the way I'm thinking of it now is, again, that each brain region is given either the short sounds, the long sounds, or the rests, and then that's how it comes to life. Is then when those are assigned, and when they are triggered, that's when the piece comes to life.
Can I ask Pepe a question? So let's make the analogy here to us triggering the artificial intelligence, the GAN program with brainwaves, with my brainwaves. So is it triggered by the region that is active, or is it triggered by certain, I'm going to call them artifacts, but I'm not using the right term, artifacts in the brainwave? Because I thought actually that's what we were talking about in the last session, is actually taking the middle range, the 8 to 12 megahertz. Am I right? That we said that's where we can read it can read the better with less noise. Am I right?
Well, I think that's going a little bit further, right? Because all we are saying here is, okay, let's quantify, the effect of specific grammar on our patterns of brain activity, so that we can see, how they are common and how they are different, and also, fine tune the grammar themselves, right? Once we get there, then we need to start figuring out, okay, so what is specifically being changed? Why this brain area is more active? It could be because there is more alpha waves. It could be because there is more gamma waves, or some other aspect. We are not yet there. Now, the other point I want to make is, will it be useful if, when we do this testing, right? This input-output response testing, if we ask ourselves, in some way, how we perceive that stimulus in some aesthetic space, right? So if we were to, okay, this is the sounds that we are listening, right? We are testing grammar 1. How do you like it, right? Or some aspect of that. Would that be useful, right? Because one thing is to have the response here, and we can make some inferences from, brain areas and what's happening, but it might be useful to have actually a specific, response from each of us in terms of how we are perceiving that grammar, right? So that's one question, right? Whether that would be interesting. I'm sure you have a question.
Yeah, actually, it's sort of like picking up from where you left right now, Pepe. I guess the question is sort of, how do we, what is our intent with this sonification aspects, right? Like, I see this as two ways. One is, as Pepe said, you can have this as a way of informing the audience or the crowd, like what is happening inside the brain. It's a way of talking, like interpreting your brain in some sense, right? And that would depend on the context in which we are deciding it. Say, for example, if it's a visual, if someone is looking at an art piece or something, and that art piece is going to be the same for all people, like everyone is going to see there. The thought process might be different, but the areas that is involved, like there's going to be visual region that is heavily involved. There's going to be prefrontal region for thinking purpose. So the areas might be similar, but how they interact might be different depending on different people. Now, if we map this to the sonification, it's a way of communicating, okay, what is happening inside the brain, right? That's one way we go about doing this. The other, if I remember correctly, the other conversation we had is we play the sound and we try to understand what is happening in the brain, like what is the response for that, right? But then the question is, there are a couple of things we might need to think in that sense. The selection of grammar, right? The grammar that we selected, is that the most conducive to elicit this response? That's a question we might need to ask about, right? Like, how do we know that this is a grammar which would elicit the best response? That's one question in that context. The other is, again, the context is a problem. Like, are we going to be a free flow where we're not doing anything and we're hearing the sound, or is it going to be related to some other activity? Because if there is an activity and a sound, there are two confounds that are happening. Like, the changes could be either due to the sound or it could be due to the actual task we are doing. I mean, so those are some of the thoughts I sort of had at this point, and just trying to understand which context are we trying initially, or are we just brainstorming like either cases at this point?
Well, I think thanks for that. I mean, okay. So I think as far as where I am with my idea of this, there is no other activity going on for where I'm sort of seeing my version of this happening. Because again, I mean, I'm sort of seeing this as it's almost I'm seeing it as sort of an individual thing that someone would go and do. Like you'd go sit and you'd watch an installation. And so you're not, what you end up being influenced by is what you are hearing. What you end up hearing is because of what you have been thinking and what regions of the brain have been firing. So that's and again, I see it moving down the line. There also being a visual that is in the same fashion, but again, until we understand the audio version of the blueprint, it can be transferred over. So no, I don't see this as somebody, with my version of it, that someone is doing something and then hearing they are just there. They're just it could just be a blank room, or it could be lit, it could be black, it can be anything. So does that clarify sort of my thought with the action part of it, Akshay?
Yeah, I mean that's because I was just wondering about the context in here, because if it is like we are just in a free flow situation, just sitting still, right? It's not that there is nothing happening. There are things called resting state networks in the brain, where there are some groups of regions which are sort of active when we are at default state, when we're not really engaged in some task, and that corresponds to quite varying our behavior response. Like what is happening at that point is correlated to most of our day-to-day behavior too. So there's going to be a lot of variability in how the individual changes depending on that. I mean, so I think that is great. I mean, if we figure out what is the task, if it is sitting still, if the regions of the brain for the resting state is sort of similar for most people. Like the most relevant regions are sort of similar for most people. So in that context, I think that is good for us. Even if we have a smaller sample size, the regions might be very similar.
Now, can I ask a quick question before, because this is a very good thought. So we're in this resting state region. As soon as we start to hear things, though, do other regions possibly open up?
Yeah, definitely. I would suspect we should, yes.
And see, that's really what I'm after, is the fact that your thoughts are triggering sounds that are then having you think of other thoughts, which are triggering other sounds. So at the end of the day, it's your thoughts that are bringing this to life. And the brain regions, obviously it starts in a resting state, and then whatever that resting state, we can have that to be triggering something. But then the more of that goes on, the more our brain will be influenced by it, and the more will start to happen. That's my thought, at least. Guys, I don't know. I mean, I'm here to learn. So sorry, you keep talking though, because I like what you're saying. I just wanted to be sure that there is a circle that I'm after, which is our thoughts are influencing what we're hearing, which is influencing our thoughts.
Yeah, if I may just add one more thing.
Please.
How I see this sort of expanding is, right, as Pepe suggested, like initially there's a baseline collection session, right, where we understand which are the main regions that is being activated. That sort of gives the initial mapping, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have the feedback phase where we are actually having the sound. Now you have both data. You have the brain data and you have the sound simultaneously being collected. Now you can actually have a mapping. Okay, we had an initial state, which was a baseline, where this was my activation pattern, right? Now I am playing the sound in parallel. Something else is happening in my brain, like from the baseline default state. Something else is different. For this particular sound, something else changed. For this particular sound, something else changed. Exactly. Right? Now we have a relative change with respect to my baseline. How is this sound changing my activation? So that will give us an indication on how this sound is influencing how the brain activity in some sense, right? Exactly. I mean, that could actually evolve over the time at that point. I mean, so I guess that's where I thought maybe defining our context is a bit important, because if it's like completely free flow and you are free to do whatever, like I mean, for example, if someone is walking and if someone is like,
oh no, not at all. And I should have made that more clear.
Yeah, Yeah.
I'm sorry, I should have made that more clear from the beginning, but I'm seeing it as a, someone were to go into a gallery space and experience an installation,
Right.
audio visual installation. You're not running around, you're not walking around when you do that. You go, you're focused, you are here watching, experiencing that. So that's what
I think that, yeah, I think that would be a state of focused attention to the stimulus, right? So you go to a theater, right, and you're going there with this goal of enjoying the evening, the music. So this will be focused attention. You're gonna be experiencing in full, the stimulus. And so I think that's really good, because that reduces noise, reduces artifacts, and really gives a more clear picture of what is happening in the brain, right? So
actually, you had your first question though. I want to be sure I touch on that. And can you re-ask your first question? I did not answer that. I know I did not answer that.
Which one was that? I'm lost myself.
It's okay if you remember it, but if you remember it, come back to it, because it was very specific and I liked it, but I wanted to be clear. It is important to understand, what are we doing?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I want to go back to what Akshay said, actually. If this is an experiment, and he said that that we can predict what areas of the brain are going to be brought into play when you are listening to a piece of music. It is a predictable effect. Am I right about that? Isn't that what you said?
After we had characterized the system, right? After we had done the testing.
But you're just saying in general, like right now, can you predict? Can you say?
I'm saying in general, do we know that we can probably put a hypothesis down as to what we're going to find when we sit in a black room and all we hear, and you close our eyes and all we do is get the input from the music. Am I right? There is something that's going to happen a certain way for everybody.
So there's some knowledge, right, about how sound in general activates the brain, right? And sound could be speech, could be music, could be different things. So there's literature on that, right? But it's very general, right? That to allow to predict a specific grammar that, for example, Amos is creating, right? So for that we need to test, right? We expect, for example, to see engagement of primary auditory cortex by virtue of being the cortical sensory organ, right? So we expect the stimulus to go to that area. So we expect that. Now, how will be activated? That's a different matter, right? What feature will be activated? With what time scale? Right? How it's going to talk to other areas?
That's further. Like, we're just trying to get.
Yeah.
I understand, Claudia. I understand what you're at. Can we make a hypothesis and say, again, making these up, brain region 2 and 3 will probably be doing something while we're in a resting state listening to music, but we want to, whatever they might be. So we know that we could make that hypothesis, and then we can test it with, I'm again keep using 3 different grammars that I could make just to kind of see. But in testing those 3 grammars, we're able to then see if we're A, right, and B, what other ones do we need to put into the blueprint as we move forward with mapping them out, correct? I feel like that's
the idea
right
now. Let me just elaborate a little bit. So I think that we are right now more in the exploratory data analysis, right? Bottom up. We're trying to understand from the bottom up, from the data. What the data, in this case, the stimulus is affecting. How it's affecting the brain, so that we can we can understand that and refine the grammar or understand how we respond. Once we have that, then we can make some specific hypothesis, right? This is top down, right? So once we know how these areas are engaged, then we can come with some hypothesis about, well, if this is the case, I can tweak this grammar to elicit this response, right? Then it has predictive power, right? And so that's how I see it. So we're right now in the bottom up, data-driven phase, exploratory phase of the project, right? That would lead to the top-down, hypothesis-driven, closed loop questioning, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if that answer.
I think Chris had a question. He was raising his hand. Chris,
Yeah,
do you-
Chris, please.
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It was just general. It was probably not related to a thing. It was almost when you mentioned each region of the brain being matched to a long and short sound. I was wondering if would it be better to have a certain threshold, and then each time the signal hits the threshold, it would play the duration of the sound. For example, it would be a short, then come back to normal. And this one might be playing a longer sound. I think it would be much better than this being short, this being long.
Right. No, I think, and again, I'm trying to understand how this can work. When I'm talking about these short and long sounds, these short and long sounds are things that I am making. Like
Okay.
I'm creating audio pieces, individual MP3 files that are, some sounds last 0.5 seconds, some sounds last a second long, sometimes some files are 10 seconds long. So I do want to be sure that that's sort of where the composer side of me is working, and I'm sort of curating a set of sounds, and I've decided to use short, medium, and long sounds. So when they happen in any kind of random order, it creates a collage. It creates an ambient piece of music. So we're not pulling the sounds from frequencies that the BCI is reading. It's a pre-prescribed set of sounds that I'm making in Logic Pro and bouncing down. And at this point, we're just trying to figure out how those are mapped and how those are then triggered. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense.
Okay,
Thank you.
and I mean, I understand what you're saying too, but what you're saying is, could you just talked about this threshold that it hits, and I'm not against that either, but it's not, we're not taking like frequencies we're hearing in the brain and tying those to some tonal movement, and that's what we're getting our sound from. I'm sort of, we mentioned this in the first session. I mean, in a sense, I'm sort of playing God in saying, these are the sounds we're going to hear. This is the thing a version of this composition, if you want to call it that, which I don't even really want to call it a composition. This version of this set of sounds will be triggered by different spots. And right now, I think we're just in the very like early baby phases of going, how can we even make that concept happen? Does that answer? Does that sort of clarify it a little bit more?
That clarifies a lot.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yeah.
I think that Christian question is interesting because we've been asking that question ourselves. How much information, what type of information are you putting forth as a sonification of what is happening inside the brain? Ultimately, we decided in the Noel project that who needs to be informed the most is me, because I'm the person in the loop.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we've been saying, okay, let's do sounds that are meaningful to me. But I think that Christian is onto something, that let's say that the vocabulary of sound is in a visual vocabulary analogous to a thick line, a thin line, and a dotted line. Let's say that's the vocabulary. Okay. So the dotted line could be long, right? Appearing long, it just keeps going because that area of the brain is engaged. So basically, it's not about the length of the line, it's about the piece of the length of the line, but it's about how long does that stay working in the brain. Does that say something more meaningful than just having assigned a little piece that is more random? So the duration of those lines, now you can imagine in a painting or in a drawing, the duration of those lines or undulation of those lines and the duration and stopping and starting has to do with the brain as opposed to what I assigned the line. So I think he's onto something, and just thinking about what, again, are we trying to portray? You are saying, I understand you because you and I have talked outside of here, but you're saying, I want a composition. You're a composer. And then,
well, I'm just thinking of how does it make the most sense to me? Mm-hmm. And I have to understand it if I can even show up at the table and have a conversation. And at this point, I have seen it as this like again, I showed you guys sort of these SoundCloud kinds of things that I used to do. And so how can, and that be taken down? But to Christian's point that I think is really good, because the way that I'm working now, we have these different brain regions at the moment. And as soon as one is read by the BCI, it would trigger blank sound. I like the idea though of what if it got to a certain, what if there was a thought that lasted a certain amount of time, and that certain amount of time is what ends up letting something be triggered. But at the end of the day, that seems way more complex. And like, we have to understand the original version, which is just this region fires. We have tied the medium sound to that region, a medium sound plays. Like, that's the basic version. And that has to be understood first before we can evolve it. Because I think it can evolve in a crazy cool way, but it can't unless we know how to stand up. And right now we're just laying on the ground. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let's not forget that our brain will learn, right? So even if we provide a very basic structure, because I think the grammar is providing a blueprint for the brain to use to play with, right? And as we don't change that structure, that mapping, the brain will start learning how to use that, how to combine elements, how to bring them in different with different duration, with different mixtures, right? So I think we need to consider that part, that the brain will adapt, will learn, right? Particularly when you allow time, to experience. And so we don't know until we know the feature, right? Until we know how a specific area is recruited, how it changes due to a particular grammar, then we still don't know how to manipulate it, right?
Right.
And so this is why we need to do this testing.
Well, you know what I just thought of?
Yeah.
And so what we're, I feel like I'm taking even another basic understanding step back. What if there were, I mean, obviously I like where we're going with this testing and being able to map different regions of the brain, but we don't even have, what I'm sort of curious about is what if all of the sounds were in a single, any region of the brain that fires, it just starts playing these sounds. Like that is, I think, the step that just that happening, that act happening, when you put the BCI on and these sounds start triggering, just because any brain activity is detected. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter what your region. Just the fact.
I think that could work. I think the problem would be that as Pepe was saying, the participant will learn over time. If it's just activating, as you say, it might be a lot harder for the participant to learn what's going on and like what things are going on in their brain that activate those sounds.
Oh, right. No. And again, I'm just seeing this as like, it's me like saying, I have a pencil, it marks on a piece of paper. I need to just see a mark on a piece of paper to know it does that. And then I can move forward with everything else. Like, I feel like right now we have yet to mark on the paper. We know we have a thing and we have a thing, but they haven't happened together at all yet. And I feel like this conversation is helping me understand the initial idea was actually much more complex. And we haven't even seen the very baby version happen, which would just be anything is read and the grammar starts to play. It starts to happen. And then we can, from there, because that's sort of one of my biggest questions is I have no idea how that's coded. I have no idea how the program works for that. Sorry, actually, hold on one second. And then when we know that can happen, then we can start to move around to different regions and use it. So that's the thought that I just had now. Actually, please, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I just to from the engineering side of things, I can sort of tell a bit more about how that generally works, right? I mean, when we talk about the regions of the brain, right, that's one layer. But when it comes to the data that we deal with, just that it's basically a metal piece detecting all the electrical signals, right? Mm-hmm. So generally, we try. There are possibly thousands of features which we can compute from a single sensor. Like from a single sensor you have on the head, you'll have 1,000 different features, each have different meanings and stuff. At times, there is this. I feel like what you said is a great way to go about this, because we sort of need to crawl before we start running, right? That sort of thing. I think right. having one having one platform that sort of works, because we can sort of build from that going forward. But I guess the question is, which feature do we start with, right? That is one question we need to select. And it is not too, I mean, we aren't really going at it blinded, because there's literature out there which might say for a particular task of interest, what could be the best feature. I mean, that is one starting point we could go about with this. Now, to a point which Pepe previously mentioned, it would actually be good if we have a task at hand, like just looking at an exhibit, right? Because it really enhances the signal to noise, right? Because you're doing a particular task, you're really engaged in that task, right? If I'm just sitting still and if I'm just listening, there could be 1,000 other things that would be playing in my mind, and it's going to be hard to recreate it every time. But if there is a particular task, which could be just looking at an exhibit, I am sort of completely attentive to the exhibit and it's sort of absorbing that, right? Having a particular task in that context might be helpful. But I personally feel like having that mapping would definitely be an interesting place to start. And then again, as you said, to expand going forward. That's just my personal take.
No, I mean, I think that makes the most sense. That makes the most sense to me at this point.
I mean, I don't know if I agree with that actually, because you are paying attention to the sound. That's a task. It's a very powerful task because you are sustaining your attention to that, right? In a quiet room, where the only thing happening in addition to your thoughts, would be the sounds, right? And so that and sound is a very powerful stimulator of the brain, right? So I think that we don't need a task on top of that yet, right?
Right. I'm sorry. When I said that, I'm sorry.
If we add a task, then we are dividing attention, right? And then if we divide attention, then we don't know exactly what is happening in one or the other.
No, I do. I agree with both of you guys that the mapping is going to help guide how it can evolve. But I really do agree with Pepe that what I'm really curious about is how the task being I'm listening to the sound that I am starting that my brain is starting to fire and create. I mean, I see that as the task. I do see that as the task until there's a visual element involved, which is, again, though, would happen in the same manner. And again, I mean, I think it could be both. I mean, I think tests could be run in both ways. I think, but I think that if we were to go look at an exhibit and then map it and then collect that data, and then we're to go to an empty room and collect that data, the data we would collect in the empty room is closer to where I want the sort of final product to live. Now, if you need a stimulus to just help the idea move forward, that's fine. But I mean, what Pepe is right. He understands what I'm sort of after, as far as what we're hearing is influencing what we're thinking, which is in turn influencing what we're hearing. Does that make sense?
Yes. I mean, so if we want to, using the analogy, of the pen and the mark, I mean, we could do that, right? The only thing we will need is to have this grammar so that we can play them, in synchrony with the recording, right? So that we can, start listening to them, right?
Right.
And recording. So it's a no-brainer if I allow it expression, right?
Right.
Because we can already record and we just need to synchronize your sound with the recording, and we need to trigger the recording based on the grammar so that we align them in time, right? So that we know what's the effect, right? So that we can do anytime, right? And then the next step would be to decipher, right? Okay, so this grammar produced this pattern over time, and we start to looking at what is changing there, right? It might be some frequency of the brain oscillation, it might be the amplitude, might be more. There are, as I should say, there are thousands of things that could change, right? And so it's why I call it the exploratory data analysis, right? We are really understanding the system. What's the response to this grammar? Now, you may have some rules, maybe unspoken rules or unwritten rules, in terms of how you create this grammar, right?
Right.
And so it would be interesting and this is more a question that if we could sort of evaluate those rules, right? Or rather than evaluate to sort of ask directly the participants to provide an input about what they think about this grammar and therefore the rules that are behind them, right? And those rules might be some sort of aesthetic rule, or maybe some other type of preference or style. I don't know. You have a way of putting them together that I don't know yet. I mean, you have given some glimpses of this, right? Like, for example, you need some rest periods, right? That's an example of a rule, right? I call it, right?
Right.
It has a specific place and importance.
Well, and that's a rule that's actually sort of built into it at this point. I don't think that so if there's, again, we have long, medium, short, and rest sounds.
Right.
And like, this is a folder of, say, 10 sounds. This has 5 sounds in it. This has 3 sounds in it. This has 5 sounds in it. I think the only rule at this point that would need to eventually be figured out is when one is pulled from this folder to play, does it just play from, let's say there's 10, does it play 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4 and then 5 and then 6 and then 7 and then 8 and then 10 and start back over? Is there a way to randomize that? That's kind of the only rule that I'm curious about. And again, at this point, I don't care. I'm just whatever's the most simple for you guys. And I think once we can test it, and then we can kind of start to make more rules and fine tune the rules a bit.
But you look within this folder of 10 pieces, 10 recordings. I mean, there was some conscious or unconscious selection, or how do you selected those 10 recordings?
Well, sure. So I selected them just by, again, what I've sort of initially made and sent and using is, like we call these folders being the ingredients. They're strictly just a trial, a test. It's like, can this actually work? Can it happen? I'm not trying to make a nice piece right now. I'm trying to just say, does this concept work? So how did I select them? They had to work together in any capacity. I mean, I selected notes that I knew they could happen in any possible way and they would work together. And then, after that, it was just a matter of, do I like them or not? I mean, there was not a lot of, again, so I was still very much just in the concept phase when I put that together, but you have to have something. I don't necessarily like the sounds. I mean, they're fine, but I don't think they're overly interesting. I don't think but they, until this is refined a bit more, there's no reason to dive too deep into what sounds are we using, how did I come up with those, et cetera, et cetera. But the main rule was they have to work together. I couldn't put just a chromatic set of short sounds because you have the potential for this dissonance that could come up that would just be really unpleasant to listen to. And I think from the composer seat, I want to make something that can work and is nice, that people are not going to just be like, oh my God, I'm so tired of hearing these sounds slammed together. I want this to be an interesting thing because I think that will elicit a better thought process, a more interesting thought process, a deeper, more meaningful emotional process, which will then that will change what we're triggering and what we're hearing.
So there was some aesthetic component there, right?
The aesthetic component was just, I want it to be something that's pleasant and nice and sort of, if you've listened to my music, there's sort of a realm it lives in. It creates this emotional scape. And, I want this to do that. And I'm trying to, I think a lot of times with sound art, quote unquote, I feel like it's very cold tones, it's very harsh, and the possibility for dissonance it's almost laughable. It's like, oh my gosh. I love hearing strings slide out of tune. I love it. I'm a fan. That's not what I want to put forward when I'm saying, hey, listen to this, have an emotional experience with this. We can if it's October, but it's not. I want it to be at this point, a nicer, more dreamscape, emotional kind of experience for people, because I have found that that's where I get the best sort of response from my music.
So basically, Pepe, having heard his music, what I realize is that he, as an artist, is just using his artist's voice to edit, even if he's not trying. That's all he can do because he has a voice that he has developed, and that's what it is. So the sounds that I would come up with would be nothing like his, because that's not my voice. And so those are the elements that we're going to be hearing.
Right, and that's
Yeah.
at this point. I mean, and again, I think when it's one of those things. Once this blueprint is fleshed out and it is understood, then you can really get into, okay, how can we change these grammars of sound to be very different experiences for people? How can we make one that's hilariously? Yeah, actually, you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might have asked this question during the previous sessions too. I mean, it comes down
that's fine.
To how you're selecting. I mean, if I understood correctly, the last time we had talked about this, you said the selection of sound doesn't really matter, right? But I feel like it actually does in some sense, right? Because you said you selected sounds which you know will work together. But for someone else, like, how do we figure out this thing? Like, how, I mean, especially for people like me, right? I don't really have a good, I mean, I can sense it if I hear them playing together. But when I'm starting to find this grammar, right? I mean, is there a way to sort of do that process?
Well, when I say that it doesn't matter, I just mean like right now in the testing phase, it doesn't matter, because the actuality of it has not happened yet. We haven't been able to sit down and experience this yet, because we're still just working on the technicality. We're working on the idea of it. But you don't need, I'm not asking you to understand the sounds. I'm not asking you to go, oh, I hear that sound, and so that's going to make a chord. My point is you're able to sit down and have an experience that you don't have to think, you don't have to worry about it, you don't have to understand it. You just feel it. It's an emotional sort of experience. And again, the output for this is so different than anything I've ever done that I'm just trying to, I'm figuring out how I even understand it. I mean, I'm definitely not coming to the table with an understanding of this. It's strictly an idea at this point. But I had to make some this concept of short, medium, long, and rests, that there has to be something to work with.
Right. Maybe let me just rephrase that a bit too.
Okay.
Maybe, like, I feel like, so what you had, I feel like that really works well. Like, however you combine it, the grammar that you have works well. Like, it doesn't matter how scrambled they are, right? My question is, do we need to have some expertise to arrive at, I mean, you selected these things that work together, right? I mean, is there an element of expertise to have that starting point? Like, or can I just randomly select few musics and just combine them?
The music's from what I have sent, you mean, or just
no,
in
no,
general?
no, just in general. Like,
well,
that
I mean,
wouldn't necessarily work, right? Or would it? Well, I mean, just found it.
Well, I mean, you could. I mean, you could just put anything you wanted in there, but at the end of the day, that's going to get pretty crazy pretty fast. I think.
Right.
You know, I want this initial, you know, and again, this initial grammar that I've created, it's absolutely for test purposes. It's like a paper cutout of what's going to eventually be a house. You know, it's just to get the technicality on. So if we can make it to where, you know, regions 1 through 5 are firing, we set each short, medium, long rest to those regions, and that actually works and it does the thing, then we can go, okay, now we can start to craft a different grammar, a different set of sounds, and you know, those can evolve in a certain way. But at this point, this is still like, you know, this is still, we have yet to walk over to the piano and push a note down and a sound happens. Right. Then once you can push notes down, then you can start to make chords, then you can start to make songs, or, you know, whatever pieces, whatever you want to call them. So, but you could put in, you could take, you know, you could take Kid A by Radiohead and you could put all of the tracks in, and you could put on the BCI and you could have How to Disappear Completely all of a sudden playing over the national anthem, all of a sudden playing over Tree Fingers. Like, you could do that. And that would be great, because if you can do that, then we're getting somewhere with it. But that's going to also sound hellish and fantastic. But what I'm wanting to, you know, sort of put forward is this like dream state. I mean, and again, when it comes, that is the composer seat of me. I am saying I want, and so this initial grammar, it's just how can you, if anything is played, how can, like you said, it works together. There's no way to make, there's no way it can mess up.
Right.
You know, so does that, you could put any sounds you want. You could put, we had talked about wind and birds and the ocean. I mean, you can put anything you want in there, but at this point, put it into what is my question. We don't have the program yet that puts it in and put the output happens. Once that happens, then all of a sudden it gets much more interesting.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
And if you do the Radiohead thing, I want to hear it because I think it sounds great.
Yeah. So I have two comments, right? One is because we have been talking so far, open loop, right? So input output response, right? So we need to consider also that eventually we will close the loop, right? And so one way to see this grammar of sounds is, as I said before, is giving a voice to the brain, an artificial voice, right? So we can listen to the brain through the sound, right? Now, this is like giving an artificial vocal tract with some limitation, right? Depending on the structure of that vocal sound, right? So there's some, as we speak, right? We're limited by our vocal. There's some sounds that we cannot make, right? Because we don't have the physical apparatus to do so. And so when we close the loop, the extent to which we can communicate, it will depend on this grammar of sound, right? So like babies that do not speak yet because they are still developing the vocal tract, the type of sound they're gonna make is gonna be dictated by the developmental, stage of the vocal tract and the brain, right? So that's one comment, right? So we need to think about that. So this is starting point, but we need to think that this is gonna be as powerful as the machinery that we give to the brain to communicate with, right? Now, the other is that, so we're talking about short, medium, long-term, long duration, right? So there's data already in neuroscience that speak about differential systems involved in the processing of short versus long duration sounds. So for example, short duration sounds are primarily processed by sensory areas, right? Because they last so short that the brain has less time to process. So they never reach completely higher cognitive areas. When you have a long duration, then they recruit sensory areas, but they have the chance to recruit also cognitive areas. So one difference I would expect to see is that the long duration sounds, we have a more rich, more higher order component in terms of the brain areas that are recruited. While the short durations, they will be mainly arriving only to sensory areas, right? And I can send you a couple of references to that. So that let's not forget that there are some structural and functional constraints that the brain imposes, right, on how it processes things. So this is very interesting because it gives Amos an opportunity to have a more figure out some more immediate response versus something that requires more thought, right?
Right.
And maybe if we are, listening to the grammar and we are in a more reactive stage, right? That we are not really, we are just in flow, right? We are just going with the stimulation that it might be more sensory, right? But if we are really engaged, with focused attention and the grammar reaches, our higher, cognition, then that means it's gonna be getting memory, it's gonna be getting experiences, it's gonna, be more engaged, right? And so that's something to think about, right? And it also may tell us how we individually assimilate or process these grammars, right? And so this is just something to think about.
Well, and I think my lack of knowledge about how a lot of the time duration is working inside of the brain with our thoughts, that's limiting the way I'm able to explain and create the idea further on a sound level on my end. And that's something I need to, anybody that wants to send me anything to read or watch or learn, please do. Because the better...
just to give you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to give you, I can send you this. So this research published in the Journal of Neuroscience Letters, right? Mm-hmm. Where they specifically assess the differential processing of duration, right? Changes within short and long sounds in humans, right? And so for them, short means 200 milliseconds and long means 1 second.
Okay.
Just to give you, that's the time scale of that, right?
Yeah.
And you might be within those or above, on either end, right? And that's fine, right? This is just a specific study that happens to look at 200 milliseconds versus not 1,000 milliseconds.
Gotcha.
Right? So and so let's also not forget that the brain likes to trick us, right? So sometimes it hears sounds where there is none, right? Or there are all sorts of illusions that the brain, given the structure of how it works, creates, right? So there's this additional. It's going to be very interesting to see how that affects this grammar.
So what do you guys think is the best, I guess, what sort of, path do we want to take to understand this? We've talked about a couple of different things. I mean, do we like this idea, what we were talking about at the beginning of, I could create 2 or 3 audio pieces that would represent a full grammar, and we can do some testing with those and see which one of those we like. I could then break that down. I mean, we already have one done with the grammar I've already made. One of them's already finished. So, and then that could then be broken down to see which we like. I mean, what you tell me what I can do, what you need from me.
So, I guess what to start, collecting some data, right? That gives some examples to you particularly. We could use some of the new systems that we have in the lab, which are very simple. They have sensors on the temporal lobes here, which is where we listen, and also in prefrontal cortex. So we have more sensory versus more cognitive, which is exactly what we want, because we want these, we want to compare sensory versus more cognitive processing, right? So if we can get the grammar to talk, to be synchronized with the recording, then we could, on Thursday we could try to give some to play that here, right?
Right.
And see what happens, right? Trying to understand that. I think we could ship this headset to everyone here and to run your own experiment.
Right.
I think for you, Amos, I think it would be important to see, how do you hear yourself?
Right. I think that's a huge part of it. Is I am a little. There's a lot to learn, to understand, to test that. Right. I can't. And so,
right.
I mean, I can make some other versions of it for us to listen to, see right. which ones we get elicit the best response. Right. Or the most interesting response, and then go for it and break that down.
I guess the question is, so you have these folders, right, with recordings, and if we were to play each folder, each stimulus within each folder, right, and record the brain response and visualize that, and maybe we can do it in real time. But if we visualize that, then we will have this library of sounds in your grammar versus this library of brain responses, that we collected, and then we start to see which of these sounds are more or less effective in triggering responses.
Yeah, I almost wonder if taking just this grammar that we already have right now, and if I made an audio track that was just the short sounds that played for a minute, and then it was just the medium sounds that played for a minute, and just the long sounds that played for a minute, and you guys listened to those to see what pops up, as opposed to giving you the whole cloud. You know what I mean? Would it be easier to break it down that way, and say, okay, cool, when we're listening to the short sounds, we're getting this, and again, the long, the rests, you're not going to, the rests are a different situation.
Yeah,
or,
so I will call. yeah, yeah, we tend to call those like a block design, where you have, a block of specific type of stimuli.
Right, it would be a block.
We say short, the short ones, and then we have a block of the long ones or the medium ones and the rest ones. That could be interesting. So I show you what it would take to synchronize, the play of these sounds with the muse, so that we can, we have the recording, so so we can just align them.
You have those, but I think that I should make again, these like you said, these block designs of the short, medium, long. I can make a 1 minute version of each of those where it's only playing that sound for you guys, because right now if you pull the small sounds in, they're only 2 seconds a piece. I mean, or if you guys could put that together on your end. Again, I think that's one of the biggest things is the technology you guys have, the programs that you're using. I have no idea. I know Logic, and I know Logic and a little bit of Max and some things like this. So, I don't know how you guys are, would do the playback on it. That's what I mean. I can make a quick, audio file of all the short sounds playing for a minute, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we typically use a program that's called Matlab that can play sounds or video, can play anything. And I think
So
we can use that, or C, or we can use C to sort of. So we will need to read your file and play that, right? Simultaneously with starting the recording, so we can align the sound, right?
And then I can see it. I see what you're saying, and it can be then, Well, let me make.
So that's relatively simple, right? As long as we have the files, the audio files, we can play them and align them to the recording.
So is the plan to use Muse? Is that?
Right, that would be just the first, pass. I mean, we could use a more complex. It's a system that I could send to everyone to explore, right? Yeah. I cannot send the others, right? But we could we can upgrade later on, if certainly for a target demonstration performance, we would use full head system, right? But we need to go step by step here. So,
Alex, can you tell me, like, the system, it's called Muse, is that right?
Yeah.
How is audio put into that? I mean, how does that? Is it just you like import a file and there's an audio file kind of thing, or how does?
No,
that work?
I mean you control the Muse through the tablet, a phone, or a computer, and so the computer will release the sounds, sometimes that triggers the recording.
I'm just curious because, again, like, I'm coming from a Logic role where you hit the space bar and stuff starts to happen. So I'm curious to just
same here. You hit the space bar and things happen, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing.
And is it MUSE? Is that the?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I'd like to. I don't know. The one fun thing about this for me is to get to look at a whole bunch of different programs.
Right. So this is a very simple, off the bench, easy system that is used. It was designed mainly for meditation kind of work, but we have a research version that we can use to collect data. We have published with that.
Okay.
And so Ashay is very familiar with that system, and actually we had used the whole system during the color field, right? So everybody here has used that system.
Okay.
Before.
Well, yeah, I can put together some, just like these. I like this idea, this block design of the sounds.
Right.
And then, I mean, I think that's a step that starts to move us. That moves us in the direction of actuality, I think. I think we've talked about it a lot. We've asked a lot of questions. And now when we get to the actuality, then we can start to look at the problems.
Right.
And look at how we can work on those things. So no, I think that's great. And I can have that to you guys by, sometime tomorrow. I'll send a few different versions.
So we can, actually.
So when we talk about listening to the music and recording the sound, right? Is this gonna be like a continuously, like when you start recording, there's gonna be one sound, the next sound, like a single file that's gonna be?
No, played? I see you. What do you guys like? I mean, would you? What makes them? What's the most efficient?
Because we would need something like that. Else it's gonna be very hard to match the EEG with the sound, right? I mean, so right now, how, if I understand correctly, how we are planning this is, we'll record the brain activity. It's going to be saving, and we'll be playing the sound, right? And we try to match them together, and then try to find what is changing, and go from there, right? If we are to do that, if you need to start and stop every time, there's a good chance that some of them might be misaligned.
Why don't I make a really long track then?
Yeah.
And
I
I'll
mean,
put
that-
like, I'll do a minute of short sounds and then like a
Yeah.
10-second gap and then a minute of medium sounds and then a 10-second gap. You know, I can make a longer file. You guys tell me I want to be efficient. So tell me, I can make
I think
it.
it would be good to have more like 30 to 60 seconds gap between each block.
That's fine. Okay. Now let me ask this. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
can we have all of them like automatically aligned, like one after the other? Like
Yeah.
we don't need to stop and start. Like we
No,
only
totally.
start.
Oh yeah, I can totally do that. Now
Right.
let me ask this. Do you think it would be beneficial to occasionally, like we do the short sounds, then there's a 30-second gap. Then we do the medium sounds, there's a 30-second gap. Then we go back to the short sounds and then the long sounds. Like, would that
Yeah.
help? Do you think? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
I think
could,
randomization definitely helps.
I like that idea. And then that way I can make a track that's like, I don't know, 10 minutes of that and you guys can do with it what you'd like. But that way it'd be interesting to see if we start with short sounds. You know, we start with short sounds and then it goes to medium sounds and it goes back to short sounds. Did the short sounds, did they line up? Do they read in the same way? And then you get into, well, what if you start with long sounds and that influences you a certain way? So no, this sounds great. I that's easy. I can do that.
I have a question about this. I thought at somewhere in the conversation, the idea was to actually do the experiment with Amos's music. Given that all these sounds are coming out of this composer's brain, who has a particular voice, and that what we were going to be doing was looking at responding to his music, and that this grammar of sound is coming out of him, and it's just basically the music decomposed.
Well, I mean, I think we can.
What happened to that?
You know, I don't know. I've always focused just on. I mean, the general focus has been on, you know, this moving forward as a. I mean, you guys can do that too if you want. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I do think. I think breaking it down into this block design, like we talked about, is going to give us the most. When we first jumped on the conversation, the best map, the best recording of the map, to then make those folders go to different regions. It's going to give us more. I guess a good term would be like regional understanding of how these sounds are affecting us. Because if we just let people listen to trapeze or whatever, one of my tunes, that's going to do something, but that's not going to. I mean, I think it's fine, but I don't think that really moves this idea forward as much.
So go back to the block. Then I'm just playing devil's advocate that if you sound just the same sound over and over and over, I don't know what we would be getting out of that versus, for example, you putting together out of those files that you talked about, you putting some combinations together that then I listen to.
Well, I think, okay.
Grammar.
What I think we should maybe do, what if we did it like this? Because I think that's a good idea too. What if it's again, let's say I make a 10-minute track. Let's say the first 7 minutes are the individual blocks. The last part of the track is a full cloud put together. And then
I would actually, I think that's a great idea, but I would, if you don't mind, I think we would prefer to have two different files. One that has the block design and another one that is actually
that's fine.
Again, a composition.
I just want to be efficient. I want it to be, sometimes the most efficient thing is to hit play and you do all of it in one run. So no, I can do that. But, you know, Helena, I think this idea of the block design, it will show us when we hear the short sounds, it will show us what regions of the brain are responding just on those short sounds. And then with
how they are responding.
And how they are responding. Thank you. That way, when we go in to make, you know, the next phase of it, as far as mapping these trigger points out, we know which points to map out. Actually, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with this idea. Actually, combining both makes sense because, I mean, right now it's a framework, right? We can always change this with different grammar going forward.
Oh, absolutely.
For sure. I mean, this is a good framework to start with. And Pepe, maybe this is to Pepe. Pepe, do you think we can? I mean, we can still separate, but can we still do the same recording, like have a longer pause in between? Because I think having a single file sort of, I
Do
wonder
you
if,
think that would be easy to process? Then
yeah,
fine.
maybe I feel like maybe that might be easier by having multiple.
Well, then with maybe just one file, as you said before.
Well, I can, guys, I can send both. I can
Yeah.
send, I'll send it as one file, but then I'll also send a single file of the, what will be the, in the sense, the end of it, which will be like a full 2-minute.
Okay.
file.
Yeah.
And then you can do whatever, because again, I want to provide you guys with the most efficient material to work with. And I mean, I don't know, I
Yeah.
can guess.
Yeah.
I don't
No,
think
I think
you guys,
this is very good idea.
Yeah, I like-
to, just to respond to Harlina, why bother with the block design, right? The whole visual system research, the knowledge that we have started with this type of protocol where researchers will, provide, a block of very simple visual stimuli to a monkey, and they will record from the monkey, and they figure out, hey, these neurons are responding to lines or to corners, to color, right? Very basic. And then after they got these basic units, that they were able to add more complex stimulation because they knew that the brain was receptive to these very basic building blocks, right? And so I see this block of short and long and medium, stimuli being like building blocks of the grammar, right? And so if we understand how the brain responds to each of these type of stimuli, I think we will have a better grasp in understanding what happened when the brain listens to a complex piece where you're mixing them, right? So I think it's a good balance between understanding the basic operation and understanding a more rich, complex, and certainly more cognitive task, right? So I think the blocks will be more sensory, right, in a way, maybe. And the composition will be more cognitive. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Just one more question. Amos,
Yeah.
In your when Jalal was talking about the combining aspect, right? When you have the composition completely with this elements of grammar included, right? Do we also know how the individual units are aligned in time? Like at this time, what is the sound being used? I mean, do we need to do some processing, or do you already have something which we could sort of use?
I'm not seeing, like, within the short sounds, say, I'm just seeing those as one set. I'm not seeing each individual one as needing necessarily information.
No, I mean like more like an annotation sort of thing, right? Like, so for example, say you have an entire piece, right? I would assume there at certain points, certain long or short or something is playing at that point, right? I mean, we can identify what is happening at different time, but it might take some more processing. I'm just asking.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean in the full version?
Right.
I mean, I can put together. I mean, I could put together a visual of what that is and what you're hearing, if that's what you mean.
I think Ashay is asking for some labels with timing, right? Short starting at 0.3 seconds, ending at 0.5. Long starting at, I don't know if your program provides a timing.
Right. Is that, and again, actually, just so I know, you mean in the full, like, everything playing together version?
Yes.
Right. Oh yeah, I know. I mean, that could be like it. That could be. It would be sort of. I mean, I can see it all in Logic. I can do that. It's a little complicated. But let me ask you this: what's the benefit of that for you?
So I guess the question is, we are assuming that this grammar is going to produce some response in the brain, right? And we try to characterize it from the block design. Now, when it comes to a real performance, or when you're actually combining all of this together, it might be quite different. But for us to even characterize it, we need to know at this time point what was actually being heard, right? It is sort of like to cross correlate. Like, okay, we found this in the block design, but when we translated this to an actual full performance, it was actually changing. Like, it's a closed loop thing. I mean, it's a different thing, right? I mean, at this point, it's a bit different. But for us to do that, we need to have a ground truth on, okay, this was what was happening at this point, and this was what was happening at this point. And when this follows this happened, like those sort of information.
I got you. I think that the most efficient way to do that then is probably going to be to have them broken as 2 tracks. just so when the full version's played, we can start at 0 and I can talk. That'll just be a little easier than saying at 10:02 blank starts. But if we start at just 0, and I can do sort of a written map of what it would be. I understand what you're saying. I think it's similar to some of a long time ago. I actually, in that packet, I think that sort of write-up that I made, one of the pages has like a hand-drawn with colored pencils version of what it looked like. I don't even remember what I called it. Like the cloud, or not a cloud, I think is how I put it. Let me look at this real quick. Hang on, sorry. I guess it being random and it not being random, but you know, again, like, let me kind of hold this up. So like I can, if this is what it looks like in my program when everything's playing, I mean, we have time here. I can write out that this is happening at this time, and then at this time this comes. That's what you mean, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I can do that. That's cool.
Yeah.
I just have
Yes, sir.
one last comment. I mean, I think you know, for this where you're putting short, I think the interval between those short sounds shouldn't be always consistent. Else we
that they should. I'm sorry, Alex. That they should. What do you mean?
Should not. I think we should have some variable amount of time between each note.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it doesn't have to be too random, but
no, I see what you mean. So almost we're making, okay, so sure. So like in this full version of the cloud right now, we're actually still making one that is maybe less complex, just so it's not overload information. Is that sort of what you mean?
Well, I just don't want the brain to be, you know, figuring out that the tone is going to be played in the next second. So of a short tone, then like a second of rest, then a short tone, then 1.5 seconds, short tone, 0.3 seconds. We need to make sure the brain isn't predicting that the sound is about to be played, or else we might not get it.
And this obviously being in the cloud version at the end, right? This is
I just mean in this, you know, the initial segments where you're going to be sending to us, I think tomorrow, where it's a bunch of shorts, then a bunch of mediums, and a bunch of longs. Right?
Oh, no,
I
I see what you mean. I'm sorry. Yes. No, Alex, I see what you mean, Alex. We need to have a short sound, breath, a short sound, breath. Yeah, I'm not going to have it going da 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 da.
It's just that the breath part needs to be variable time. It can't be short sound, 1 second breath, short sound, 1 second breath, short sound, 1 second breath, or else I think we'll start to understand that pattern, and we won't be able to get as much information out of it.
So I should randomize the length of time in between the sounds in the initial block design. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. Okay, good. This is what I need to know. This is good.
That's a good point, Alex. Yeah.
Yeah, Alex, that's great, man. Because yeah, we will start. Yes, absolutely. And I guess, Alex, what would then perhaps happen if we had them? Let's say we had the short sounds. There was always a second between them. Our brain might eventually just think that's one long sound. Is that kind of what you mean?
Yeah. Maybe. Oh, maybe we just wouldn't have such reliable correlations between the.
I can see. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If we don't randomize, the brain is going to learn the block.
Yeah.
It's going to try to focus more on the block rather than the individual segments, and we want to avoid that.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. No, that makes sense. Heldian, I wanted to say one thing to you, to your point about the way I'm looking at this right now. Let's say we're listening to an orchestral piece. Our brain is going to process the whole orchestral piece. It's going to be quite intense, right? If we stop the orchestra and we just have the flutes play and we record that, we can see sort of where our brain is processing the flutes. We stop the flutes. We then have just the strings play. We can see where the strings are being processed. We stop the strings. Then we just have the percussion play. We see where that's being processed. And so we're just able to hone in and magnify a little bit better where things are being processed, as opposed to the whole orchestra hits us and we're going, we think that's flutes, we think that's percussion, so we're really dissecting it. And so I think that's what we're doing right now.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's 11:40, so I think
I know we're late.
Yeah, we have a plan. If we get those at least part of that, one of the files, and we can try to connect the mute system with that, and so that on Thursday we can start to listen to what's what's coming out, right?
Right. Well, I'm going to put something together in a a little bit. Who do I need to send this to? Pepe? Just they're just kind of the
I
or
would
Akshay or
think
Alex or
Akshay
whoever
would
would like it.
and Akshay can distribute that to everyone.
Okay.
And something that we can do is also send you one of the new systems, and then we can tell you how to use it.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So that you can explore. So for that, we will need your home address or some physical address.
I'll send you an email with that information. I mean, I know that Public Art has it if you want to get it from them, but if it's better for me to send it to you, I can do that.
Yeah, I think it's better to get it directly.
I can do that.
And some of you already have. Geraldine, I think you don't have one, right?
No.
So we can do that. Yeah, once we start exploring ourselves, the own impact, I think that would be great.
How does this connect to? Is it just USB or what? How does it connect?
This is wireless completely.
Cool.
We have a tab right now. What we have is we have a tablet to which it streams and we collect it. But there are different ways. Like we can actually stream it to there's a software called Python, which is a programming language. We can directly stream it to there, but that involves a bit more work. But right now, how we set up is we collect in a tablet. For the data is saved and we can use it later.
Okay. Well, I know we need to run. If anybody else has thoughts, like feel free to call or message me. And I mean, I think the conversation is what makes this turn into something. It's not just my ideas saying, hey, let's do this, because I'm only good for about 15 to 20 seconds. And then it evolves with you guys. So, you guys know a lot more than I do about how this can evolve. So don't hesitate to ask questions or bring ideas to the table with it, because that's how I can learn. And the only way I can possibly get better at any of this is to learn. So I appreciate everybody's time tuning in. I really do. It means a lot that you guys are even curious to listen to the conversation about this and talk about this. So, know that you have an open line if thoughts or questions come up.
Great. Thank you, Amos. Thank you,
okay,
everyone.
guys. Well, y'all have a wonderful day, and I will see everybody Thursday morning. Okay. See you guys. Bye-bye.